Translator, Ninetales. Editor, Ninetales. Chinmu fled like a gust unleashed, his vital chi rising and rising, surging ever more robust with each breath. No matter how many li he sprinted, the folk of disabled elderly village could always keep pace with his stride. Even Blind followed alongside the rest, as if treading level ground, his steps steady, unhurried, yet never falling behind. Just as Chinmu rushed into a certain forest, a pitch-black figure erupted forth and roared. Die, young'un! It was the devil ape. The moment it saw Chinmu, the young'un who had once again trespassed upon its domain, it let loose a furious bellow. One-armed old Ma cast the raging devil ape a single glance. That glance held no emotion at all. Yet it frightened the colossal beast to its bones, making it feel as though death would descend the very next instant. It no longer dared to swagger. Abandoning its territory at once, it turned tail and fled. Chinmu continued his mad run all the way back, his vital chi circulating and flourishing, and the remaining journey passed without incident. Only upon returning to disabled elderly village did he rouse from his trance and discover he was coated in filth. Without realizing it, a thick layer of muck, either black blood or grimy fat, had caked his entire body. Muir, go to the river and wash, Granny C said. Blind, go with him so that the monsters in the river won't take him away. Blind leaned on his bamboo cane and followed Chinmu to the river. Chinmu immediately stripped naked and plunged into the water, scrubbing away the filth. Blind lightly tapped the river's surface with his bamboo cane, startling a huge green fish that had been creeping up on Chinmu. It sprang from the water at once and splashed several yards away. That fish was about 6.5 yards long, and its whiskers were like 8 tentacles, each 3 yards in length. After washing clean, Chinmu looked out at the rolling waves. Bravery swelled in his chest, then swelled further, until it became a blazing tide of feeling. His vital chi churned restlessly, rushing up toward his throat, and he unleashed a guttural cry. It was as if he had thrown open the temperament treasure vault of the gods. That cry swept through the mountains and forests, making even the river's surface quiver. As the reverberation continued, Chinmu rose from the water and suddenly dashed across the river's surface in great strides. With every step, the strength in his feet fused with the vital chi streaming down his legs, bursting forth in sudden force. Each time his foot struck the river, water exploded outward in all directions. Before the disturbed spray could even fall back, Chinmu was already several yards ahead, running atop the water. Tap, 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 tap! The crisp slaps of Chinmu's feet striking water rang through the air. Soon enough, he had run over a mile across the river's surface. Chinmu felt as free as a bird, his cries growing more and more ecstatic. He ran with wholehearted joy, long strides and carefree steps carrying him everywhere over the river. It sounded as though heavenly music, played by a band of immortals, were descending from the sky, accompanied by the melodious cries of a dragon and a phoenix. Chinmu's speed was astonishing. In but a short while, he had already crossed from one bank to the other. A gentle wind swept over the river's rippling face as he began to make his way back toward the side he had started from. Blind propped himself upon his bamboo cane. The river wind swept over him and ruffled his white hair. Hearing Chinmu's cries of exhilaration, he gently nodded and smiled. Whilst the monkey cried incessantly from one side of a river to another, the dreadfully cold wind froze his crotch, he recited loudly. Don't you feel cold while happily roaming the river with your rear exposed, Muir? Chinmu fell into the water with a splash, a startled cry echoing from the river's center. A moment later, the youth swam ashore and climbed out in embarrassment, drying his body so he could put his clothes back on. Chinmu's moment of enlightenment by the riverbank had made him forget himself completely, so he'd forgotten he was naked and started sprinting across the river. Yet, running entirely bare like that had actually felt quite cool and refreshing to him. It's a good thing that Grandpa Blind can't see, he thought to himself. Chinmu got dressed and was in the midst of adjusting his shirt when he suddenly lifted his head. Old Ma, Mute, and the rest of the villagers were standing in the forest before him. Even Granny C and Village Chief, who was being carried on a stretcher, had come as well. Chinmu's face turned beet red. Gee, Granny, when did all of you get here? He asked, stuttering. Granny C burst into laughter and said, Moore, All of us have seen your butt countless times, so there's nothing to be embarrassed about. We heard your lively cries and came over to have a look. Come here, Muir, village chief said, coughing lightly. Since you were chased down by 5 practitioners of the spirit embryo realm, you probably have some injuries that are harder to notice. Let Apothecary examine you. Chinmu stepped forward and let Apothecary thoroughly inspect his body. When he finished, Apothecary shook his head and said, "There are no major problems. All of his wounds are superficial." Village chief then conducted his own examination and signaled that Chinmu could leave. Butcher immediately dragged him off to train his knife skill. Dissatisfied that Chinmu had needed over 5,000 strikes to defeat that senior brother Ku, Butcher had decided to subject him to merciless training. Apothecary watched Chinmu's vigorous knife training, then walked over to village chief's stretcher. "Did you discover anything?" he asked. "The speed at which his vital chi cultivation is advancing is extraordinarily fast." Village chief exclaimed without concealment. "The difference between yesterday and today shows progress beyond my imagination. Those cries he released earlier could only have been made by resonating the throat with vital chi. They even possessed god and devil characteristics." Leaving aside that he has yet to break his spirit embryo wall, even a spirit embryo realm practitioner wouldn't be able to achieve god or devil resonance. If we were ordinary humans like him, it would take us 20 years to cultivate our vital chi to that point. The cries Chinmu had unconsciously released while running across the river had come from his throat resonating with vital chi. Yet at the same time, he had inadvertently infused into that cry the devil voice he had heard in the ruins. The strange part was that while analyzing the devil's voice, he had also memorized the collective voice of the maidens. Therefore, he had committed every single part of their god voice to memory. As a result, he had also mixed aspects of the god voice into his cries without realizing it. When the others heard Chinmu's cries, they regarded them as normal, for they could not detect the profundity within. However, since village chief could hear it clearly, it definitely was no small matter. God and devil resonance? Apothecary sprang in shock. How did he achieve such a thing? To gain 20 years' worth of cultivation overnight is simply too terrifying. Could the blood of the 4 spirits have caused this? Village chief shook his head. Even though the blood of the 4 spirits can improve his constitution and vital chi, enhancing them to such a level is impossible. Apothecary pondered deeply, then replied, "Could it be that Muir is actually a natural genius? Could he have been the perfect seedling for cultivation since birth? Why would a natural genius have the constitution of an ordinary human?" Village chief frowned. A natural genius would have been born with a spirit body. Furthermore, to actually achieve god and devil resonance, which genius could do such a thing? "Is the god and devil resonance in his cries good or bad?" Apothecary asked. "I have no idea," village chief replied. "I heard both god and devil resonance in his cries. The god voice and the devil voice within them were fighting against each other. I'm not sure if that's good or bad." Apothecary's gaze faltered, and he asked, "If that's the case, where did the god voice and the devil voice come from? I don't know." Both men's heads began to ache. It had been a long time since they'd suffered a headache from being unable to understand a situation. Yet ever since they adopted Chinmu, the baby who had floated down the river, the number of things they could not comprehend had only continued to increase. Night soon fell, and disabled elderly village was once again cloaked in darkness. In a certain wooden house, Granny C slept in her room, and Chinmu slept on his own. Halfway through the night, a somber voice resounded within the mind of the unconscious Chinmu. A melodious voice echoed in response. These were the god and devil voices from before. They began to clash, their sounds growing noisier and louder. The resonance of the god and devil voices slowly intensified into a collision of darkness and light. Within his mind, Chinmu suddenly became a formless soul floating in the sky above that clash, blankly staring down. The scene of that struggle between darkness and light looked exactly like the ruins where he had first witnessed such a spectacle. However, this place was far more vast and majestic. The darkness resembled tentacles that constantly pierced into the light, while the light would suddenly strike in short bursts, wiping out the darkness. Moments later, Chin-Mu was finally able to clearly see what the darkness and the light truly were. The darkness was actually endless waves of devils, surging toward the light like gushing tides. The devilish voice was not the voice of a single entity, but the war cries of billions of devils. The same held for the light. It was actually a sea of gods in golden armor, crying out as they swarmed to battle the devils. Chin-Mu now stood high above this struggle, making all the gods and devils seem like tiny dots. He had thought it was merely a clash between light and darkness because he had been too far away to see clearly. Now that he could see what was truly happening, shock and horror overwhelmed him. Chin-Mu abruptly opened his eyes, his body drenched in sweat. He realized the clamorous voices of gods and devils were filling his mind, threatening to split his head in two. However, at that very moment, the jade pendant on his chest slowly rose into the air, floating up to the center of his brow and gently coming to rest there. A soft, soothing sensation flowed into Chin-Mu's head, and the voices vanished. Chin-Mu sat up sharply, breathing hard as confusion filled his heart. He had no idea what had just happened. Moments later, he left the house and walked through the village, comparing his jade pendant with the ghostly glow of the village's stone statues. Darkness enshrouded everything outside the village, so the jade pendant gave off a similarly ethereal glow. Chin-Mu stared at the pendant in a daze, his eyes gleaming with its light, as though he could not tear them away. Unbeknownst to him, Granny C approached from behind and happened to witness this haunting scene. Even though we of disabled elderly village raised him, he doesn't belong with us, she thought to herself, her heart aching terribly. He'll have to leave someday. Then, all of a sudden, determination appeared in her eyes as she steeled herself. The outside world is much more dangerous than the great ruins. He isn't strong enough. Not yet, Ninetales. Ninnytails. Those bright eyes fixed on the jade pendant without blinking. Though Chin-Mu was but 11 or 12, the world had already taught him much. Another time, when Chin-Mu followed Granny C to lend a hand in bringing a child into the world, it was unlike that other bitter, tragic ending. This time it went smoothly. The sight of a family gathered close, faces full of warmth and love, stirred a heat in his chest. And so Chin-Mu asked how he himself had come into being, and where his parents might be. Yet Granny Sai could not answer. She only told him she had found him in the river, and that the jade pendant had been bundled with him. That was why Chin-Mu treasured this jade pendant. He hoped that one day he could use it to find his parents, and ask them with his own mouth why they had cast him aside. After a while, Chin-Mu hung the jade pendant back around his neck, where it always rested. His expression smoothed into calm as he buried this strange incident deep within his heart, together with the pendant's unsolved enigma. Granny Sai, who had kept her distance behind him up to that point, returned to their house just before he did. The next day, Old Ma, blind, cripple, and mute continued hunting beasts to refine the blood of the 4 spirits for Chin-Mu. These 4 perilous men had essentially swept clean the region around the village, within several hundred miles, to be exact, so they had to journey farther to capture spirit beasts whose blood could be refined. The village chief had difficulty moving on his own. Apothecary often had to go out to gather herbs. Butcher was always bitter and would go mad from time to time. And Deaf cared only for calligraphy and paintings. Thus, Granny C was the only one who could keep Chin-Mu company while he cultivated. Yet Granny Sai was not always in the village either. As both tailor and midwife, the neighboring villages often requested garments from her or asked her to help deliver a baby. Early this morning, Granny Sai left the village, and Apothecary went to gather herbs. Butcher and Deaf carried village chief to the village's entrance and set him down there. Then the two split apart. One went to sharpen his knives, the other went to paint. Crushed by boredom, Chin-Mu wandered to the riverbank. Ever since his cow had transformed into a woman and gotten herself stabbed to death by Cripple, his chores had lessened drastically. Standing by the river, he drew in a deep breath, his chest swelling full with air. Then he circulated his vital chi, and his chest slowly sank back to its normal size. He still did not exhale. Instead, he used his vital chi to nourish his lungs, tempering them until they were exceptionally tough. Then he compressed the air within his lungs, forcing it to shrink to 1/10 of its former volume. Chinmu continued to breathe in, yet his chest did not expand. The instant he reached his limit, however, he shot forward, bursting forth like an arrow loosed from a bow. Chinmu dashed across the river like a violent gale, cleaving the water into twin surging waves that exploded outward behind him. Then, without warning, cold metal flashed above the river. While running, Chinmu had drawn his pig-slaughtering knife. It shimmered through the air, its glints like dragons swimming among clouds. This was Butcher's pig-slaughtering knife skill. Like its creator, the blade art was bitter to the bone, wild and domineering, refusing to bow to heaven or earth. The knife light swung back and forth, as though it could crush anything that dared stand before it. In the next breath, the glimmer of metal vanished. Chinmu had returned the pig-slaughtering knife to its usual place in the sheath upon his back. He shifted into Old Ma's fist skill, guiding his vital chi into his arms and hands. As he clenched his hand into a fist, Chinmu seemed like the Yangtze crossing a high plateau, rushing through the sky, then gushing into the sea in a torrent that never ran dry. Thunderclap 8 strikes first form, spring thunder on the lonely East Sea, punch after punch flew. Within Chinmu's mind appeared the vision of a raging river pouring into the thunderous waves of a boundless sea, and that same essence seemed to take shape within his fist art. But the moment it formed, his fist abruptly opened mid-strike. His fingers and palm quivered uncontrollably. The air before his palm compressed at once, then detonated outward, shattering the river's surface and blasting water in all directions around him. It still isn't complete, Chinmu thought as he ran. I still can't achieve thunder in palm. Disappointment pressed down on Chinmu. The lowest level of Old Ma's Thunderclap 8 strikes required one to achieve thunder in palm. Each punch had to erupt with a booming thunder that carried terrifying power, enough to seize a person's soul. Only then could it become a divine art, one that could be cultivated all the way to the highest realm, where one could command thunder and lightning with bare hands. A realm Chinmu was nowhere near reaching. Still sprinting, Chinmu seized a bamboo staff from where it was strapped across his back. He stabbed and swept at the space around him. Yet what he displayed was no ordinary staff technique. The skill Blind taught him was in truth a spear art. His bamboo staff became a great spear, churning the river like a furious dragon. Each swirl, each poke, each flick, each thrust was accompanied by a burst of water. When he felt satisfied, Chinmu traded the bamboo staff for a massive iron hammer, replacing the latter's position on his back with the former. Then he unleashed a sequence of strikes, showing the hammer skill taught by Mute the blacksmith. This hammer art was simple and crude, yet it carried the force of several tons. Every blow was ponderous and heavy. Paired with Chinmu's swift, agile running, it embodied two extremes of martial prowess. After sprinting and practicing each skill for a long while, Chinmu finally felt his vital chi beginning to run low. His body grew weary, his strength nearly drained. Glancing about, he realized he had gone dozens of miles downstream, far indeed from disabled elderly village. I actually ran this far without realizing it, he thought. Chinmu kept surveying the surroundings until his eyes caught an island in the middle of the river. The river's violent waters surged around it. The sight piqued his curiosity, and he immediately rushed over. A moment later, Chinmu stepped onto the island, finally setting foot on dry ground. This island was not very large. Set in the river's heart, it resembled a small hill thick with vegetation, about 1,000 yards across and around 130 yards tall. On the island stood a dense forest, where only the sound of rushing water could be heard. Deep within that forest, not far from Chinmu's position, was a dilapidated ancient temple. Walking into the forest toward the temple, Chinmu saw the structure was in ruins and filled with cobwebs. It clearly had not been maintained in a long time. Still, it could serve as a good place to rest. Chinmu stopped before the temple. One of the entrance doors had collapsed, revealing dim light within. Inside stood a towering Buddha statue clad in gilded leaves, radiating a golden glow. Yet since no one had been here for a very long time, most of the gold leaf had peeled away, revealing copper enamel beneath. On that copper were strange, squiggly characters, as though they were drawings of tadpoles, gigantic, thick chains coiled around the Buddha's body, binding it in place. Following the chains with his gaze, Chinmu saw them extend from the small temple, stretch all the way to the island's shore, and plunge deep into the raging river. How strange! Why are these chains tying down this giant Buddha? Chinmu thought to himself. Grandpa Blind said there was some rule about lighting incense before entering a temple. Since I don't have any incense, I can only rest just outside the entrance. Chinmu cleared his throat, bowed, and paid his respects. This little one is from Disabled Elderly Village, which is located near the river. I have come across your temple and would like to rest my legs here for the time being. If I have alarmed the owner of this land, I am deeply sorry. He hesitated for a moment, then continued to recite a prayer Blind had taught him. Since I was young, this little one has weak kidneys and frail body. My primordial yang has long since dispersed. If a goddess sister is present in this temple, please don't hurt me. Blind was old and well-traveled, so Chinmu trusted his words firmly. There should be no problem with reciting the prayer exactly as Blind had taught. After finishing, Chinmu sat down on the temple's stone steps. He removed the iron boots from his feet and the iron weights from his calves, then began to restore his stamina using his breathing technique. He had worn both the boots and the weights the entire time he sprinted across the river. This set had been forged by Mute the blacksmith, and it weighed far more than his previous set. Suddenly, gentle laughter echoed from behind Chinmu. You said something pretty interesting. A feminine voice said, I guess I won't eat you anymore? Oh, well. Chinmu immediately turned around to see who had spoken. Sitting on the palm of the Buddha, laughing at him, was a little girl about his age. She was barefoot, dressed simply, her hair braided into 3 plaits, 2 thin braids dangling before her chest, and a 3rd thicker braid hanging behind her. Her legs swung over the edge of the Buddha's hand, swaying back and forth. Golden bracelets around her ankles chimed with each movement, joining her laughter so that it sounded even more lovely, like early spring sunshine. Chinmu hurriedly rose and said, How may I address Goddess Sister? What Goddess Sister? The girl leapt down from the Buddha's hand and flashed him a broad smile, revealing small canine teeth. My name is Shan Chinger and I live nearby. I've never seen a Goddess Sister, though. What is your name? Seeing her beautiful smile, Chinmu felt she could not be bad, and he let out a breath of relief. My name is Chinmu, which means the boy who herds cows. Chin is my surname. The elders in the village would always let me herd the cows. Oh. Xianqinger walked behind the remaining temple door and pulled it open so she could look him over more closely. Then she peered behind him and giggled. Where's your cow, then? Chinmu hesitated briefly before answering. It transformed into a woman, so there no longer is a cow. Such an interesting thing can still happen? Xianqinger exclaimed in astonishment. Then her eyes lit up with excitement. How did it transform? Can you transform? Chinmu shook his head. I am currently unable to, but my granny can. I thought you knew, Xianqinger said, disappointed. What other interesting things have you seen? Quickly, come in and tell me all about them. Just as Chinmu lifted his leg to step forward into the temple, his gaze slid past Xianqinger, and he noticed a few white bones jutting out from behind the Buddha statue. A sudden chill rose in his heart. His leg froze mid-air, and he said hesitantly, Grandpa Blind told me to always light incense and pay respects to the Buddha before entering a temple. Since I don't have any incense with me, it's best for me to stay out here. Just come in. Xianqinger smiled sweetly. I think it would be better for me to stay outside. Chinmu blinked, drew his foot back, and gave her a smile far more sincere than the ones cripple liked to wear. Why don't you come out instead? Then I'll be able to tell you about some fun, interesting stuff. Xianqinger's gaze flickered slightly. She bit her lips and giggled. I know some shameful things that only a boy and a girl can do. Come in and I'll teach you about them. Compared to her earlier bright, youthful air, the sweetness in her breath now carried a faint, beguiling hook. Chinmu's face flushed red, and his breathing turned short and ragged. I've had weak kidneys since I was young, he said stubbornly. Get in here right now. A guttural roar burst from the little girl's mouth.